I'd encourage people to do is just to recognize how big of a problem food waste is and to just sort of arm yourself with some of that knowledge. So the fact that globally we throw away a third of all the food we produce. If it were to be a country, food waste would be the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China.
Welcome to Becoming Radical, the podcast for creators, builders, and dreamers just like you. What does it mean to become radical in a world of constant change? Hosted by Michael Gaizutis, each week we'll explore the real-time journeys of those rewriting the rules. From untold failures to groundbreaking success. If you're ready to break the boundaries of limited thinking, this is your guide to unlimited growth.
Welcome to Becoming Radical again, and we are here today with Tessa Clarke. Tessa, it's so nice to have you here. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So Tessa, we've learned about your story a little bit. From what we understand, you're the CEO of Olio, and you have a really fascinating background. It sounds like you've done a lot in the world of technology and what you're building with Olio, but more importantly, your background in education between Cambridge and Stanford. We're really excited to hear more about the story and the inception of Olio and what inspired you to tackle this space in this industry.
So I guess the origin of Olio really starts back in my childhood. I grew up on my parents' family farm up in the northeast of the UK. It was a very rural, very isolated, very, very hardworking upbringing. My parents had no issues whatsoever with putting myself and my two younger brothers to work. So I grew up really very embedded in nature and really kind of felt my place as part of the ecosystem. So I've always had a strong sort of environmental bent. But I never knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. I always envied all those kids who were so clear from the age of 14 what they wanted to do. I never knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. But I knew I didn't want to be a farmer. I didn't want to be a farmer's wife. And my parents were always super clear to me that kind of education was the route to whatever future I wanted to create for myself. So I studied really, really hard at school, which is what enabled me to go to Cambridge University for undergraduate to study social and political sciences.
Wonderful. That's fascinating. Social and political sciences. And, it's amazing how every little thing we do influences the bigger picture, the sum of all parts of everything we end up doing. Do you feel like your childhood, growing up on the farm, influenced then the segue into Olio and, your views on sustainability, more importantly? Do you think that was a big part of that process?
It was, although I came back here, I've come back full circle, but via a very indirect route. So I spent most of my childhood and indeed my early 20s almost being a little bit embarrassed about my upbringing because it was something that hardly anyone could relate to. Yeah. People were not particularly interested in pigs and cows and chickens. They wanted to talk about movies and going shopping and stuff like that. Yeah. So I kept my childhood under wraps. Now, though, as I reflect on the role that my childhood has played in helping me become who I am today, I've recognized that it's actually an incredible, instead of being something to be embarrassed about, it's actually an incredible source of strength because on a farm, you are constantly having to problem solve. Every single day, something is going wrong. You're working with animals, the weather, machinery. It is just one problem after the next, which sets you up really, really well with oodles of resilience. And that is kind of what you need to be an entrepreneur as well. But you also have to think very creatively, very laterally. You have to be very resourceful. But perhaps most importantly, my upbringing on a farm taught me firsthand just how much hard work goes into producing the food that we all eat every day. And so I grew up with a pathological hatred of food waste. And my mum's words of waste not, want not, ringing in my ears. And that definitely played a part in inspiring me to co-found Olio, which really exists to help solve the problem of food waste.
It's fascinating. I did not grow up on a farm myself, but I came from the inner city of Chicago and then the suburbs of Chicago in the Midwest. And I grew up with grandparents who immigrated from Lithuania, from Eastern Europe. Same philosophies, though. We don't want to waste anything. We reuse everything. Every last bit of everything is reused, and it sticks with you as you go through life and as you experience, these new ventures that you build, or these new relationships. So it's fascinating, and I'm guessing that your time at Cambridge and Stanford also contributed to your entrepreneurial journey and what you learned, in education. Did that play a role too in kind of refining some of these core characteristics that helped you to define, this is what I want to do next?
I'd say sort of yes and no.
Yeah.
So at Cambridge, I studied social and political sciences, which was sociology, politics, philosophy, social psychology, social anthropology. And I would say that I am someone who is fascinated by the intersection of sort of humanity, nature, technology.
Yeah.
I think a lot in terms of systems, but then I really like to marry that with practical kind of getting stuff done.
Absolutely.
At Stanford Business School, you would have thought that I would have been inspired through living in the heart of Silicon Valley to become an entrepreneur from my experience there. But sadly, I wasn't. And again, I've sort of looked back and reflected on that and asked myself, why was that? And the best answer I've come up with was that at that time, there were no role models who looked or sounded like me in entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley. And I do believe it's really hard to be what you can't see.
Absolutely.
So it just didn't even cross my mind to do something entrepreneurial. Now, when I look at who I am as a human being, it's kind of obvious that I was always going to be an entrepreneur, but it just took me a very long time to pluck up the courage to get here myself. And what really gave me the entrepreneurial itch, I guess, was that I was pretty senior in the corporate world. And I was very fortunate to get to go to lots of events and hear lots of inspiring people talking from the stage, sharing their incredible stories. And I can remember my last few years in the corporate world just feeling increasingly frustrated that I wasn't inspired by myself. I was so inspired by everyone else, but I was profoundly uninspired by myself and what I was doing, even though I had something that looked great on paper. And so I had this growing entrepreneurial itch, but I thought that what I needed to found a business was a great idea.
Right.
What I've now realized is that actually I needed to find a great problem. And thankfully, I found that problem just over 10 years ago now, when I was moving back to the UK after living overseas. And on moving day, the removal men told me I had to throw away all of our uneaten food. And obviously, the inner farmer's daughter in me flat out refused to put perfectly good food in the bin. And so instead, I went out to the streets to try and find someone to give my food to, failed miserably, went back to my apartment, and I resorted to cross-border smuggling. And that was when I just thought, surely there has got to be an app for this, because at that point in time, there was an app for absolutely everything. And I couldn't believe it wasn't a simple app where I could advertise my food and whoever wanted it who lived nearby could request it and pop around and pick it up.
It's so fascinating. The best, I agree, the best products, apps, services come from problems that we identify with and then creating solutions to solve those problems. And usually it's amazing. I find this too. The things you don't have friction with, the things that are just effortless, that are problems and you have solutions for, end up being the best success stories and create, I think more importantly, the most significance. And that's what we really care about, is the significance. So when I think about Olio, what you've done, you guys have done quite well looking at your what you've achieved in market. You're growing, you're building. What are some of those early stage challenges in the very beginning that you think that you faced in developing and launching Olio? Do you think if you go back in time, there were like 3 or 4 or 5 big challenges you saw early in the days of building Olio in market?
Yeah, so the very first challenge that we knew we would encounter before we even launched was that for Olio to work, it needs to be hyper-local in nature. So we had that real chicken and egg situation. How do we get both the supply and the demand at a hyper-local level?
Yeah.
So we solved for that by really doing some very manual work that was not at all scalable, but it involved us basically handing out free food on street corners for a couple of months one summer, and talking to people about this new app that was coming along that would enable them to give away, throw away their spare food. And through that process, we managed to get just over 2,000 email addresses of people who all lived in this local community who were interested in finding out about Olio. And then through some market research surveys that we'd done, we had found 12 wonderful people who were really passionate about what Olio was doing and they really wanted to help us out. And we said, well, on the day of launch, you can declutter your kitchen cupboards, add all the supply to the app, and then we're going to send these 2,000 people to the app on launch day. And that was really kind of how we got the flywheel started. The next sort of big challenge that we encountered was the fact that our early adopters hated food waste, therefore they didn't generate any. And we had also hoped that local cafes, bakeries, delicatessens, etc., would work with Olio to give away their surplus food at the end of the day to bring extra traffic into their stores. And we quickly discovered they were far too busy running their businesses to be messing around on an app messaging with members of the community. So we were a food sharing app with no food, which is pretty useless. So we thought, how do we, existential crisis. And we thought, well, how do we solve this? And we came up with the idea of taking the people who had lots of spare time and no spare food and matching them with the businesses that had lots of spare food, no spare time. And today that has now developed into what we call our Food Waste Heroes program. We have over 135,000 trained volunteers who, once you're trained on our food safety management system, you can claim a collection slot. And a collection slot is an opportunity to go to a local supermarket, for example. At the end of the day, you'll pick up all of their unsold food, you'll take it home, add it to the app. Within minutes, your neighbors are requesting it, and minutes later, they're popping around and picking it up.
Wow.
And that really helped us to kickstart supply at scale in our hyperlocal marketplace. And also that's our primary source of monetization, because the businesses pay us to ensure that their food is redistributed instead of paying a waste contractor who was previously taking that food off to waste streams. So I'd say that was the second big challenge we had. The third challenge we had was, how do you grow a business that at the time was not revenue generating? So we had hardly any marketing budget at all, but obviously we needed to accelerate our growth. And we very quickly discovered that our mission was something that people were incredibly excited about. And also from a personal perspective, they really wanted the Olio app to work near them. And in the early days, we had lots of people reaching out to us saying how much they loved Olio and was there anything they could do to help. And so Sasha and I called probably the first 100 or so people who sent us those sorts of emails, and we just brainstormed with them to figure out, well, what could they do to help us? And as a result of those conversations, we co-created what is now called our ambassador program. And we've now got over 50,000 ambassadors who you can either go on a digital pathway where we send you lots of content and information to spread the word about Olio by your digital networks, or we will mail you, or you can download physical marketing materials like posters, letters, flyers, which we've found to be incredibly effective. Kind of old school guerrilla marketing, but actually very, very effective, especially in the early days.
It's incredible. You know, I think being mission driven, to your point, is so paramount in today's day and age. Has been for a while, but now more than ever, when we think about all of these businesses and startups and teams and brands and apps and keep going, they're all so similar to one another. But to be mission driven, again, creates that level of significance. And I think when we have that level of significance, when we truly believe in something, it is not only powerful, it is empowering. So I love that. I think that is completely on point. And it kind of tracks back to another question I have around your team, your co-founder, Sasha. You know, do you think that you were able at some point for our community to understand, to be able to leverage your combined experiences when building this app and this business? Do you think that there was more value from you with this and more value from this co-founder or this team member? Did everybody kind of come together and bring forward their strengths to really synergize and build something remarkable?
Yeah, so you mentioned about how powerful having a mission is. And I mean, I would go further than that. I would say having a really strong mission is a superpower. And it is a superpower of Olio's. And that incredibly strong mission is something that really unites Sasha and I. So I think we've all seen the statistics that show that sort of co-founders falling out can be one of the greatest sources of startup mortality. But if you are not just mission aligned, but mission obsessed, which both Sasha and I are, you both have the same level of ambition, which we both have. And if you both have the same values, which Sasha and I do share. So the Olio values are inclusive, resourceful, ambitious, and caring. If you've got all of those three things right, then actually your co-founder relationship can be really, really strong. And Sasha and I have always taken a real kind of divide and conquer type mentality. So on the day we founded the company, when there was just the two of us, we sat down and we wrote down all the 12 or so functions that could exist in a business, and we allocated them out between the two of us on that day. And to this day, we still broadly have retained responsibility for those areas. And we decided that given that we were putting everything on the line to build this business and to try and solve this problem, now was not a time for either of us to be doing something that we sort of quite fancied having a go at. We thought we need to play to our respective strengths here. And that approach has been incredibly helpful. Having that real clarity of roles and responsibilities between the two of us means that we haven't sort of had to be territorial or fallen out with each other.
Of course. It's wonderful. And I think when you can divide and conquer and really lean into the value that you can bring together, but also individually. So you have that individuality, those strengths, those synergies, and then you intersect that with the business plan, the growth. And you know, it's so interesting. You mentioned the word resilience. When we think about building a business, building a brand, and becoming radical in the market, resiliency is the number one trait I think any person, any team needs, because there's so many unforeseens. And that brings me to another question for you. You know, when you think about what you've done, Olio has facilitated the sharing of millions of food portions today, which is incredible. What do you think were those driving strategies that were employed to achieve this rapid user growth? You know, what do you think are those main takeaways?
So I'd say the first one is having just that really, really clear mission and purpose. Secondly, communicating it. Thirdly, asking people to help. So we often get people saying, how have you got so many volunteers? How many have you got so many ambassadors? Well, we just asked people to help us, and then we made it really easy for them to help us. I think the other thing I would say is around team. So Olio has always been a remote first business way before COVID happened. And what that enabled us to do was to get the best quality talent wherever it might be. And that talent also ended up being much more diverse talent than you would ordinarily have had if you had insisted that people had to be commuting into an office in central London. And we really believe that diverse teams are the best performing teams. So I'd say there were sort of a few things that worked very well for us. I think the other thing that worked well for us was just the size of the problem space that we are tackling. So globally, a third of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away. It's worth over $1 trillion. And yet there's honestly been no innovation since the rubbish bin or the garbage can. And that large market size was very helpful in terms of unlocking venture capital investment, which has also been crucial to our success. So through being able to raise venture funding, that has enabled us to scale the business, bring on brilliant team members, but also take the time to find the right business model. Because what we're doing is brand new, totally unique. No one anywhere in the world is doing what we're doing, either in terms of that sort of hyper-local food sharing app or in terms of how we develop our business model. So that has inevitably taken time, and venture capital funding has really sort of helped us on that journey.
Capital can be such a catalyst to opportunities and to alignment. I think, you know, when we think about where can this go, how can we take on this industry challenge, conquer, or radically transform an industry, as you're talking about, you know, having capital access for many businesses, for many small startups, growing brands can be very, very valuable, especially in early stages. I totally agree. When we talk about environmental and social impacts of Olio, you know, how far reaching is that? You know, how much has that changed since your launch to where you are today?
So when we first launched Olio, we didn't have a good grasp of our environmental or social impact. We just knew that what we were doing was the right thing. And of course, on our back-end systems, we could measure how many items had been successfully shared and how many people were using the platform. But in the early days, we didn't have the resources to figure out an impact methodology to enable us to really calculate that impact. Fast forward to today, and we do now know that we've had over 50 million unique neighbor-to-neighbor doorstep transactions take place. And through those connections, our community has shared over 100 million meals and
Amazing.
also 14 million household items, so books, clothes, toys, toiletries. And the environmental impact of that has been equivalent in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, equivalent to taking over 830 million car miles off the road. And we have also saved over 33 billion litres of water. So that's the environmental impact. But then the social impact is just as strong. 40% of our community say that they've made friends through the app. 2/3 of our community say that sharing has improved their mental health. And 3/4 say that sharing has improved their financial well-being. So obviously people are saving a lot of money by picking stuff up for free via Olio versus buying stuff.
It's incredible. You know your statistics. I love that. You know them quickly. And that goes a long way. I think when you truly understand a business and the dynamics of what it takes to build and the impact it's making, and you can quickly relay those statistics, it does so much, and kind of goes back to the idea of profit with purpose, and how does that philosophy shape Olio's business model, your operations, profit with purpose, what do you think that looks like for you today? And what do you think that will look like a year from now or 2 or 3?
So we fundamentally believe that profit with purpose is going to be the new business model of the 21st century. And we get very frustrated because we seem to live in this sort of weird dichotomy where people think that if you are having a positive impact on the world, you must surely be a charity. And if you are having, kind of scaling rapidly and getting to sort of massive penetration, then you're almost certainly a business, but you're probably doing all sorts of terrible things to people and planet. We believe that we all need to be really focusing on that third path, the third route, which is profit with purpose. And for Olio, that really is embedded into the business and the business model. So the more items that come onto the platform that get given away, the more environmental impact we have, the more social impact we have. But also, given that so much of the supply is coming onto the platform from businesses who are paying us to take that food away, then the more revenues we're generating as well. So our profit and our purpose kind of grow in lockstep with one another. And we changed the articles of association of the company when we did our Series A round of financing. And essentially it says that the responsibility of the company, its directors, is to give equal priority to profit, people, and planet. And then a few years after that, we then had the resources to be able to apply to become a B Corp, which is an official certification that confirms that we are really living those values, not just through our articles of association, but in every way in which Olio shows up in the world.
Yeah, I think the transition to becoming a B Corp is a big transition. It's a big leap, and it really validates what you're doing, with this, profit with purpose mentality. I think it's so major. And, when we think about the sharing economy, where do you think it's going in the next decade? I know this is difficult because there's so much happening with AI and rapidity and technology, but, just the sharing economy at large, where do you think it will go? What are your predictions?
So whether we like it or not, the sharing economy is going to become the economy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because of a concept called Earth Overshoot Day, which is the day in the year in which humanity has used all the resources that the Earth can replenish in a year. And when it was first measured in the late 60s and early 70s, Earth Overshoot Day was at the end of the year, the end of December. So that means that humanity used in a year what the Earth could replenish in a year. If you fast forward to last year, Earth Overshoot Day was the 1st of August. So what that means is that every single thing that every single one of us, 8 billion people, consumed after the 1st of August last year was net depletive to the planet. So clearly we cannot continue to consume raw materials at the rate and pace that we are going to have to transition to a circular economy, which is all about reuse, rental, repair. I would desperately like to see that happen within the next 5 or 10 years. I fear it's going to take much longer than that, but it is entirely inevitable as Mother Nature starts to put her foot down to
Absolutely.
humanity, then we will be forced to transition to a much more circular economy, and the sharing economy will be at the heart of that. But the great news is that digital platforms really help facilitate the sharing economy. And the other thing is that the sharing economy enables you to consume items for a fraction of the price that it costs us right now, but also you get that real kind of feel-good factor of connecting with people in your local community, understanding the prior life that that item had, or that wonderful feeling of passing on your item for someone else to enjoy it.
I think with the sharing economy, there is such community with this. It's so impactful. And, you talked about everything here, and it's such a cross-border dilemma, independent of geography, whether you're in San Francisco, whether you're near London, whether you're in Dubai, it's indifferent. I mean, this idea of consumption is so large. And you're absolutely right. The net is being actualized at a rate of acceleration we've never seen before. When we think about a segue into company culture, we talked about this a little bit and alignment with you and your co-founder, but just as a whole, how do you cultivate a company culture that really does align with Olio's mission and values beyond your two co-founders? How does that branch out? What does that typically look like for you?
It's actually remarkably easy to do if you're deadly serious about it. And we are deadly serious about it. So our first, and it starts at recruitment. So our first requirement is that absolutely everybody who joins Olio has to be not just mission aligned, but mission obsessed. And that is a really high bar. And
Yeah.
certainly at times we have been tempted to lower that bar. In particular, for example, during 2020, 2021, where you could not hire an engineer for love nor money, it was very tempting to think maybe we just need to lower that bar. But we resisted that temptation because we knew that it would destroy what is really quite magical of Olio, which is that sense that we are all in it together. We're all at the same level. We're all pulling the same direction. Second thing, again, around recruitment is recruiting for people who share the same values as us. So everybody who joins Olio in their final presentation has to present to each of the 4 company values and give examples from their life, either professionally or personally, that convince us that they really do eat, sleep, breathe our 4 company values. If you get the recruitment right, then honestly, that is 80%, if not 90% of the hard work done. Then you just have to, as leaders, make sure that you remind people of the mission, which can actually be remarkably easy to forget when you're just caught up in the day-to-day grind. And you ensure that we are always individually and collectively living the company values. And we do that through our 360 feedback process, where everybody rates one another on the extent to which they do or do not live the company values. And twice a year, we have an employee satisfaction survey where we also ask people how well they think that the company as a whole is living our company values. So we take it really seriously.
It's amazing. I think with that seriousness, again, going back to significance, I heard somebody speak the other day, success versus significance. And it really resonated with me because it doesn't take a lot to become successful with a benchmark against others. It takes a lot to become significant in a sea of the same when you're doing something radically different. And I think the level of impact, not just being mission driven, but as you said, and I love this, mission obsessed is so huge. So thinking about a mission obsessed entrepreneur, what advice would you give to them looking to build an organization, a startup, a company, a brand, or a team that is mission obsessed?
So the first thing I would say is it will feel like you against the world for a lot of the time. And you do just have to be relentless in your pursuit of the mission. So you must never give up on the mission, But you must be extremely flexible and adaptable with regards to how you fulfill that mission. And in fact, I'd go a step further than that. You should be constantly experimenting to find the right route, the right path through to fulfilling that mission, because it is almost certainly not the route or the path or the product or features that you thought about when you first founded the business. So remain relentlessly focused on the mission, very flexible and adaptable in terms of the path that you use to get there. The other thing I would say is to learn from others. We all kind of stand on the shoulder of giants, and not to be afraid to reach out and ask for help. In particular, if you have a very strong mission, you'll be amazed at how much time and support people are prepared to give you, perhaps irrationally so. That is one of the great advantages of having a strong mission, is that people want to see you succeed and they want to help you do that.
The mission can create a movement. And I think that is so incredible when we do it the right way and we lean on others to help support, because it's bigger than us. And that's where, again, tracking back to significance, it goes beyond us. It's what can we give to them and they and others, cross country, cross continent, cross everywhere, cross border, everywhere. And I think with that said, great advice, sage advice, but what obstacles, we talked a little bit about challenges, but what obstacles have you encountered that were major obstacles, if they were, in scaling Olio? And how did you overcome them? And it could be the type of thing where it could have pulled you down so far, or maybe, again, you didn't experience those, but were there any great obstacles that you've encountered along the way?
Yeah, a couple. The first one really plays off what you just said, which is that when you have a really strong mission and when you invite others into it, people get very opinionated about what you should and should not be doing. So it can be a real double-edged sword. At Olio, for example, we have these hundreds of thousands of volunteers. 60% of our new signups come to us through word of mouth. Our net promoter score is off the charts. All of that is wonderful. But the double-edged sword is that your community cares so passionately about what you're doing that they really hold your feet to the fire. It can be emotionally exhausting dealing with people. It just feels like criticizing you all day long, because everybody has an opinion about what you could and should be doing better. So that's definitely a challenge. And I've had to learn how to take on board all of that feedback, but know how to sort of pass through it to find just the relevant stuff. And honestly, I've just had to develop a much thicker skin. I was very, very over emotional and people pleaser in the early days, and I've got a slightly thicker skin. The second real challenge that I'll touch on has been fundraising. So we are a female co-founded tech for good. We've always been early in our revenue journey. So there are a lot of things that make us, quite frankly, pretty unattractive to conventional investors. So raising capital has always been, honestly, an absolutely soul-destroying nightmare for us. We have managed to do it, but we have experienced every single conscious and unconscious bias that you could possibly imagine on the journey. And then the third challenge, I would say, and perhaps the most existential of all challenges, is the fact that whilst we have such a clear vision of how things need to be in the world to build a sustainable, equitable future for all of us, and honestly, a livable future for all of us, the sad reality is that the current system and way of doing business means that we are constantly being told by businesses that we sell into, I'm sorry, sustainability is just not important right now. And that is really, really challenging, not only because it dramatically slows down your sales cycles, but also on a very human level, when you can look outside your window and see all these really, really disturbed weather patterns, and then you read the data and the science, which is telling us very clearly that things are getting a lot worse, a lot faster than any of the models had predicted. And then in the same breath, you're having people tell you it's just not that important, and humanity collectively acting like the orchestra on the Titanic. That's a really difficult sort of cognitive dissonance to live with on a daily basis. So that's probably the biggest thing to battle with, and you've just got to keep on going.
there has been a lot of recent pullback, within the United States from other countries and nations with, climate initiatives that could have been very forward and progressive. So I'm sure that will play a role in the cross-border dilemma and what we see. But with that pullback comes a unique opportunity, I think, for private sector to come in and say, Olio is here to support. We are here to do X, Y, and Z, and other businesses and brands and startups and teams alike. And that's very important because, as you said, it's not fractional when it's such a large problem to solve. So I think, what we're talking about here is such a dilemma that needs to be addressed. And, there are a lot of different opinions, too little, too late, this isn't happening. But in the end, when you look at hard data, it's very important. It's very significant. And it takes millions, billions of people ultimately to create that movement that pushes the needle forward. So, talking about that, the movement, the people, when the COVID-19 pandemic first began, when it first started, how did that affect Olio, if it did? And what adaptations do you think were implemented during that time to succeed and prevail?
So for the first 24 hours after lockdowns had been announced in the UK, it was deeply unclear whether a neighbor-to-neighbor food sharing app could continue to operate or not.
Right.
But we heard loud and clear from our community that we had a responsibility to keep operating during the pandemic. So we worked very closely with our food safety lawyers and the team, and we essentially adjusted the model so that every pickup became a no contact pickup. And we provided lots of messaging throughout the app, lots of guidance about how to do that. And I would say that for the first sort of 2 weeks, we saw about a 25% decline in the volume of transactions taking place over the app. But then from that moment onwards, over the sort of year to 18 months that we were in and out of lockdowns, Olio grew 5-fold. So we had absolutely explosive growth. And I think there were several reasons for that. First of all, that was, I think a lot of people were being told they had to stay home to help. And that did not feel enough to many people. And they wanted to do more than just stay home to help. And giving stuff away via the app. We even had we ran a campaign called Cook for Kids so that people were cooking school meals for local school children near them that could be picked up to help the kids through the fact that the school catering facilities weren't open. So lots of people wanted to help. People also very instinctively wanted to connect with their local community in a way that they had never wanted to do before. And they realized how good it felt to feel that bit more connected in the local community. And then finally, that year was the first year when really collectively we woke up to the reality of the climate crisis. We saw it coming in to our homes, through our TV screens, as we saw wildfires raging all over the world. And that really did mark a major transition. That year was also the year when we rolled out our services working with Tesco, which is the UK's largest supermarket retailer. And over the space of about 3 months, we started redistributing surplus food from 2,700 of their stores. And so that was another really crucial accelerant to our growth.
It's incredible. And speaking of growth, what are your future plans for Olio? What does that look like? Are there any new features or expansions or things that you're able to share or things you're excited about sharing that are on the horizon?
So right now we are really focused on proving out the end-to-end unit economics in the UK, as are so many other businesses right now. I think everyone's sort of really retreated back to the core. But we are, in parallel, we've got some really interesting conversations underway in a number of international markets, either with large flagship retailers that want us to come into that market to redistribute their surplus food, and or we've had some governments reach out to us because they are increasingly recognizing that food security is a top strategic priority for their countries, because in a rapidly heating world, in an increasingly geopolitically unstable world, then access to food and ensuring that you can feed your citizens becomes a really pressing topic. And if you are a country that is throwing away a third or half of all the food, then obviously that's a massive food security issue. So yeah, we have early but promising international expansion conversations underway. And in the era of AI, when previously translations might have been or were a barrier for a small organization such as ourselves. Actually, that barrier has been removed, which is really exciting.
It's very exciting. And, speaking of that excitement, if I were an individual or a community, how would you recommend getting more involved in reducing food waste and promoting sustainability at large? What would you encourage people or communities to do?
Well, the first thing I'd encourage people to do is just to recognize how big of a problem food waste is, and to just sort of arm yourself with some of that knowledge. So the fact that globally we throw away a third of all the food we produce. If it were to be a country, food waste would be the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China. And perhaps a really surprising one, which is that the greenhouse gas emissions of throwing away 1 kilogram of food waste is equivalent to the greenhouse gas emissions of landfilling 25,000 plastic bottles. So next time you go to throw away a head of broccoli or something, you are having an equivalent environmental impact of throwing away thousands and thousands of plastic bottles. And then that's before we even cover off just how water intensive food is. So an apple isn't just an apple is 70, 80, 100 litres of water that went into producing that. And then just recognize that it's all about small steps and small actions. If you want to reduce food waste in your home, the most important step probably is just to go shopping with a plan. So you only buy what you need to buy. And then I would definitely learn up on the food storage tips and tricks. Get creative with reusing your leftovers, and if all else fails, then give away your spare food to a neighbor via Olio.
Yes, go to Olio. I agree. We talked a lot about Olio. We talked a lot about people, community, social impact, being mission obsessed. What personal habits or routines that you've employed do you think have really contributed to your success and your significance as an entrepreneur?
So I've been on a massive journey in this respect. So when I started working on Olio, I had a newborn baby and a toddler. I was sort of trying to do consulting work to keep some money coming in. I was the main breadwinner of our family. My husband was renovating the house. I had no time for me at all. And I got just really kind of unhealthy and unhappy and badly out of shape. And I just knew that could not continue. I could not continue to exist like that. And so the one tiny step I took was just to book myself into a gym class at 9:30 on a Monday morning, once a week. And I'll never forget the first time I did that. I sort of felt like I was skipping school or something, that someone was going to come haul me back to my desk because I was not at my desk when I should be. I have been on a massive journey since then, where I now actually really work hard not to sit down at my desk until at least 10 or 10:30 in the morning, because prior to that, I am getting breakfast for my kids, getting them to school, and then I am doing a workout or going for a run or a walk or listening to a podcast. And that is my highest leverage time at Olio, really investing in myself, my health, my well-being. And that's when I have all my most creative thoughts. That's when I have real kind of breakthroughs in terms of problem solving. And we strongly encourage everybody at Olio. So everyone who joins Olio, I give them an onboarding session. And as part of that, we spend quite a bit of time talking about well-being, the importance of it. And I strongly encourage everybody to book their well-being time into the working day, because I think it's really unrealistic to leave it till the end of the day when it's dark, it's cold, you're exhausted. 9 times out of 10, you just don't do it. So, and that seems to work really well for people.
Invest in you. It's so true. Invest in you every day and really develop a system around that. I think it's so paramount for people to understand that when you can structure, and it's hard, it can be a luxury until you develop a system. And a habit takes time. It takes several days, I think at least 3, to develop a habit. And once you get habitual, and you could create a rhythmic tendency to do something, be it well-being or taking care of yourself or exercise or any of those things, it's so important. So, who really inspires you? You're very inspiring, without a doubt. But who do you get inspired by, or what do you get inspired by? And your mission, your purpose, your impact in this space, whether it's direct or indirect, what is a point of inspiration for you?
So I am inspired because I have it burning in my soul and DNA to show up every single day trying to play my part in solving the climate crisis. There is truly nothing more existential for humanity, and millions of people are suffering right now as we speak as a result of it. I don't tend to spend much time sort of seeking, putting sort of one or two individuals on a pedestal that I could sort of call out. I honestly take inspiration from absolutely everywhere and from everyday conversations. I'm much more inspired by a story that I see shared on the forum section of the Olio app about a small step or a little act of kindness that someone in our community has done. I find that really inspiring because, and actually I'd say Olio overall, I was brought up, I think like so many of us were, to think that strangers were bad and scary and that that you kind of just didn't want to interact with people that you didn't know. What I've learned through Olio is that, like, honestly, 99% of people are just good human beings. And where things do go wrong, it just tends to be a communication issue rather than anything more sinister. And that's actually been really heartening to know that there are millions and millions, billions of great people out there. We've got a lot more in common than we have difference.
Oh, 100%. I think that's absolutely true. When we think about personal values and business objectives, how important do you think it is to align those two worlds together? And more importantly, if we were speaking to somebody directly, which we are today, our community, what guidance can you offer them in achieving that kind of alignment? How do you bridge that gap between mission obsessed on the business side and personal values and alignment there?
So for me, they're one and the same. Like
Yeah.
I have never been the type of person who has been particularly good at or enjoyed sort of having a work self and a personal self. And actually, I think most people dislike that. And most people feel best when they can just show up being their authentic selves. Similarly so I try and live our mission in my personal life. I try and live as sustainably as possible. I am so far from being perfect, but I just remind myself that it doesn't matter. Every small step is a positive step. It's better than no step at all. I do not beat myself up because I think sort of desire for perfection leads to paralysis, which is the last thing that we want. So we should celebrate every small win. And then in terms of my values, the Olio values are also my personal values and Sasha's personal values. I think that was how we came up with the company values because Olio was just the two of us for at least the first year. And so we just had to describe sort of how do we want to show up in the world? How do we want to take our business decisions? And those four words, inclusive, resourceful, caring, and ambitious, they really kind of personify how we show up in the world.
You mentioned perfection. I heard this once from a musician, actually, Keith Urban, I think it was. There's no soul in perfection. And I think it resonated with me because, as a perfectionist, somebody who used to be one, I realized that you're trying to always change everything and control everything. And when you let loose of that and you just say, you know what, it's okay. Everything will work out. We just have to bring our best authentic self to everything we do and truly care and create that level of impact and resonance and significance. And I guess that brings me to one of my final questions for you. In our community, if you were to leave one thing behind to say, this is what I would advise to someone in their mission to become radical, to change and challenge and conquer an industry or an idea or, some hub of information that then creates a movement, what would be that one big takeaway you would say, this is what I would say is most important in your pursuit of becoming this next thing or changing the world?
I would encourage people to forget about what their parents wanted from them, to forget about what society's expectations are, to forget about what your friends' definitions of success are, and instead turn inwards, look deep into your soul, project ahead to your deathbed and think, what do I want to look back on? What do I want to feel proud of having achieved? And then I think you'll get enormous clarity about what you want to do and how you want to show up in the world. And you really, really can't beat waking up every single morning and knowing that what you're doing counts and that you're doing work with purpose. It's transformative in every way, shape, and form.
That is amazing. I love that point of view. I think it really will resonate with so many. And it's something that is so often overlooked because we think about these benchmarks that have been placed on us, whether they're,
Yeah.
direct or indirect. There are these benchmarks. We're always on social media. We're comparing ourselves to everybody, but looking inward is like the true, the true opportunity to see and reflect as to what could be. And that's really important. So when talking about clarity, this has allowed us to really understand more about you, your journey, the history of Olio, where you are, where you're going. And we really appreciate you being here today. Where can people find Olio and find you online? Where's the best place to become a part of that community?
So the first place I'd recommend you go to is your App Store or Google Play, Olio, Olio. You will find us. If you want to go to our website, we are olioapp.com. And if you want to find me, I am Tessa Clarke on LinkedIn and also Tessa LF Clarke on Medium, where I write opinion pieces.
Amazing. Well, Tessa, this has been a delight, truly. I loved hearing about your story, and we truly appreciate it. We'd love to have you back on the show someday to follow your progress and your effort to becoming radical. And thank you again. And we look forward to watching you and cheering you on from around the world.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Radical. If today's episode sparked something in you, follow wherever you listen. Join the conversation and share it with someone ready to think beyond limits. Be unlimited, be bold, and become radical. See you next time.
Game over.